So the question is, what people recognise in terms of relationships with must be the key one. What are you doing? You're building? Yeah, well, this is this is the survey, and that's the contour line, and it's self. My question, if we want to rate, we need to know the actual level. Yes. And I'm not sure. I rang my today and he said, oh, I didn't do that. I didn't say right on that map. But there might be some indicators that I can find out. Like, because one I heard that I saw that. We've got one on the middle of the road and we've got one over here. But do you know? Well, I'll just say so you've got and that just happened that way. Even you can't. It's pretty much the same. It's exactly the same. The levels. Yeah. Because that's beside the point. Well, my father and all of them what we do.
Yeah, we can just say, oh, we're at one place to see. That's really right. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I'd just like to introduce myself and ourselves. My name's Owen Clyden. Up until a couple of months ago, I was the president of the Building Designers Association of Queensland, which is now known as Building Design Queensland. Now I'm just a lowly building designer who resides in Toowoomba. I have a medium-sized practice up there. We do a mixture of residential and commercial and industrial projects, everything that you need to do when you work in a regional community. I introduce my co-presenters. Lisa McKee is here with us. Lisa is also a building designer. She has a practice in Cairns. She's come all the way from Cairns today to talk to you about designing houses with appropriate responses to climatic conditions. We've also got Sean Kirkland with me. Sean is a building designer based on the Gold Coast. Sean is going to be talking about the challenges presented by small lot developments. And somewhere in the middle, I'm going to talk about designing for sloping sites. Something which, coming from Toowoomba, we have a couple. So I welcome Lisa McKee to lead off. Thank you, Lisa. It's working.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll do it straight up. Sorry, I've got notes because I've got heaps to say. So as Owen said, my name's Lisa McKee, so I'm a building designer from Cairns. I run a small design practice called Urban Abode Building Design. I generally do residential developments, mixture of new homes and renovations. So today we're talking about design considerations with regard to climate. So as you can see on the map here, Australia's broken into 8 climate zones. Today I'll be focusing on climate zone 2 because that's what we are here in Brisbane. I obviously live in Cairns, which is climate zone 1. A lot of the same considerations for us. Obviously it just gets a lot hotter and a lot wetter up there. So as a building designer, climate's something that we just do. You know, we don't really sort of sit down and think, what do we need to do? It's sort of just built into the design sort of process. Slide please. So the main characteristics of zone 2 where we are here is high humidity with a definite dry season, hot to very hot summers with relatively mild winters, and a distinct difference between summer and winter, and not too much of a difference between your nighttime and daytime temperatures, unless you get that little bit west where it gets a bit cooler. Next. Yeah, so the key design objectives for designing for climate. So the main objective here is to utilise the natural sources of heating and cooling, such as the sun and breezes, just to minimise the need for auxiliary heating or cooling, air conditioning. So this is called passive design. You've probably heard that term. So the main objective really of passive design is to feel more comfortable in your home, and that's referred to as thermal comfort. So obviously thermal comfort also takes into account reducing your heating costs and also, I guess, the impact on the environment. I'm not going to go into that side of things too much because that could be a whole other talk on its own. So today I'll mostly just be talking about the thermal comfort aspects. So the most economical and easy time to achieve good passive design is when you're designing a new home or doing a major renovation. This gives you the opportunity to cover every aspect of orientation and that kind of stuff. Obviously, there is still things you can do to an existing home to make a big difference with regards to the climate conditions. So I'll touch on that in the last slide just a little bit. So just some little things you can do to your existing house with sort of little to no cost. So thermal comfort. So the main factors influencing both physical and psychological human comfort are temperature, humidity, air movement, and then exposure to radiant heat sources and exposure to cool surfaces. So those last two, I guess, are things like your walls and slabs that can hold heat or hold cool as well. Obviously, glass can tend to transfer the cool temperature as well. So psychological thermal discomfort can make us change the settings on our air conditioning, guess more dramatically than you need to. So every degree change that you make on your air conditioner can increase your heating or cooling cost by up to 10%. So obviously, if you decide, okay, it's really hot, I'm going to drop the thermostat by 5 degrees, that can make a really big difference to your heating and cooling costs. So design strategies. So there's a number of design strategies that we address when we're designing a home. So building shape. So I guess the best ideal plan for a house would be long and narrow with lots of openings in opposite directions. So you get that airflow through, because it will, if you've got openings in opposite walls, that will help to draw the air through. And then orientation. So maximizing a northern exposure and also shading your western walls. Obviously, a lot of these things can be really hard on smaller lots or if you're doing a renovation. So it's often not, you might not be able to get everything into your design. It's just a matter of getting the most you can out of it. And then also room locations within the building. So obviously there's, on any given lot, there's going to be better locations for living areas and bedroom areas. And that can depend on the occupants of the building as well and how they live within the space. So ventilation, the next one. So obviously ventilating your ceiling cavity or having high level openings that will again help to draw the air through. And again, cross ventilation, as I mentioned first, in building shape, that also helps to draw the air through. So solar access, the last one, is also about orientation. So a northern aspect is always best in this climate zone. Again, minimising the heat gain on the eastern and western walls and having large roof overhangs or verandas to help shade the walls, the windows. So, building materials, so colour and texture. Obviously, lighter walls and roofs are going to minimise the amount of heat that gets brought into the building. Also, the materials you choose, so lightweight materials are not going to hold the heat the way that, say, block construction is. I'm not sure how much block construction there is down here, but in Cairns, it's sort of common. Your kind of cheaper first homeowner sort of market generally do block construction because it's cheap, quick, easy. The thing with block construction though, if you've been in a block house, is it holds up all the heat during the day, and at 10 o'clock at night you can go and put your hand on the wall and you can still feel that heat coming through. So obviously with a lightweight frame house, you're not going to get that heat transfer. Sort of once the sun's gone, the heat's gone. You've also got the opportunity to insulate those walls, which again stops the heat in getting into the room in the first place. So that leads to insulation. So insulation in either your roof space or your walls is going to make a huge difference. In Cairns, and I'm not sure down here, we tend to use the foil-backed blanket insulation under your roof sheeting. So that's basically stopping the heat even getting into roof space at all. So things your building designer will take into account when they're designing your house. So the design considerations, again, always citing the home for the exposure to the cooling breezes and cross ventilation. Again, using thinner floor plans with openings in opposite walls to bring the breeze through. And again, designing for nighttime sleeping comfort, that's a big one because that also, again, reduces those heating and cooling costs. So windows and shading. Windows is a tricky one because obviously we all want lots of light coming in, but as far as insulation and thermal comfort, glass can be not great. So I would always recommend using tinted windows. Something that's probably going to come in over the next couple of years in the building regulations as well with the energy efficiency ratings is that we'll probably all be using tinting on the windows because it does just help to keep the heat out a lot. Shading the east and west facing walls all year round. And also another really big one is using windows with the maximum openable space. So I love louvers. Basically, you open your louver, you've got 100% of that opening breeze coming in. So that's a really good way to get extra ventilation into the house. So I've lost my space. So insulation, again, insulating any walls and roof surfaces from the heat and using the roof spaces to provide that buffer. So, you know, you've got the insulation on your roof space, on the top of your roof, you've got that open roof space, and then that's sort of providing a buffer between inside and outside. Again, in Cairns, I'm not sure about down here, we don't tend to use the bulk ceiling insulation. It can be really handy if you are heating a room to keep the heat inside the room. Not sure, probably in the general Brisbane area, no one's using heaters. But that's sort of the main reason, but generally the foil insulation on the under the roof sheeting is going to be your best bet. So as well as obviously the lightweight wall framing, if you can lightweight floor framing as well with ventilation under the house always makes a big difference as well. And again, just choosing those light colours with your walls and roofs will make a big difference. So what you can do in your existing home to make these little improvements. Obviously, if you're not building a new house or doing a major renovation, it can be a little bit tricky to incorporate some of those things I've spoken about. Probably one of the biggest things would be to use your ceiling fans. If you don't have ceiling fans, it's not a huge deal to get some installed, and that can be a really easy way to just get that airflow through. When I design buildings, I put ceiling fans in kitchens and bathrooms as well. So ladies doing your hair and makeup makes a huge difference. And even just standing in the kitchen with the heat that you get from cooking and everything, it really helps. And again, so the shading of, I talked a lot about shading walls. If you've got an existing house, plant some big shade trees on those east and western sides, or, set up some vines, something like that, which will then prevent the heat. If you can stop the heat from reaching the outside walls, then that's half the battle won. I guess some other sort of slightly more expensive or invasive things could be to add some insulation to your walls or roofs. Every little bit helps. Or the other thing could be to either replace your roof sheeting with a lighter roof colour, or even just painting your roof a lighter colour can make a huge difference. The other thing that you could install would be roof vents. So sort of your whirlybird type traditional roof vents. So there are some sort of more modern versions of those, will help to sort of draw the air out of your roof space, and that can make a big difference to an existing house. So as I said earlier, every project's different, especially renovations in existing houses. So it's sort of a matter of working through all of those things that you can do possibly to make those changes. And obviously with an existing house, you can't really change your orientation. So it'll be a matter of just doing a few other things that way. Okay, so on that note, I'll hand over to Owen to talk about sloping slabs.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you. Oh, awesome.
Okay, so I guess this is almost a lead off from Lisa's talk on designing for climate. We're now taking that climatic response and we're looking to adopt that into a site that's not your traditional subdivision site. Most of our new subdivisions that we're seeing at the moment are flat, rectangular, long, skinny, narrow frontage. That's what you get. But there still exists a few sites that look like this, depending on what you're looking for, depending on where you're living, and depending on what you're wanting to achieve. Often these sites turn up in more rural areas more than in the urban areas. So it's a different design response to your inner suburban sort of house. So why would you build it on a sloping site? Because you get a view, because you get the opportunity to capture more breeze, because you get the opportunity to change the vertical context of the house so that if it's split, you get a greater access to breeze, you get a greater access to daylight. So there's all those good things that come with having a sloping site. The bad thing is that it usually costs more to build on a sloping site than it does to build on a flat lot. You know, that's inevitable. There's a builder up the back who's going to give me cheap, but we won't worry about him. So there's always a trade. You might find that the sloping lot is the last one left in the subdivision. It might be the hardest one to get away because it's seen as being more challenging than the others, or it's seen as being more expensive to build on. But for that reason, you might get that at a lesser cost on occasions to your standard flat lot. That one with that view wasn't at a lesser cost. And so what we're looking for is we're looking for an appropriate built form response to the site that's you're presented with. What we see too often is the flat block response to a sloping site. Bring in the bulldozers, cut, fill, build a retaining wall, and then apply the generic single-story residential construction type onto that. The house cost is low, or as low as normal, but you potentially spent $50,000 to $100,000 on building retaining walls and doing cut to fill on your site. That's what we want to try and avoid. So we're trying to make use of the site, work with the site, not work against the site. So when we're presented with a sloping site, as with every site, the first thing we do is we do a site analysis. We need to understand the site. We need to understand what are its good points, what are its bad points. You know, ideally, we all love the site that slopes away to the north or to the northeast. So we capture those lovely cooling breezes in the afternoon that come up from the southeast. We get the early morning sun coming into our living rooms. We're sheltered from the southwest. Everything's beautiful, and that's probably the site that we've identified here for you. We also get sloping sites that face into the southwest, so you cop the brunt of the storms, the brunt of the winds, and the brunt of the afternoon sun. It's a different response. It still works, and people still buy those lots because oftentimes those lots have a magnificent outlook. For one, I love watching the sunset. I love watching the storm fronts come across. And on a northeast facing slope, I can't see any of those things. So a completely different response in terms of what you design for depending on the orientation of the site. The other things that we want to have a look at is we want to look at where there's vegetation. We want to look at where there's watercourses, because we don't want to be building our house where the water naturally flows. We don't want to be building a house where we're going to, you know, we've bought a block of land that's got a view. We don't want to build the house so that we have to cut down or destroy everything that we bought the block for so that we can see the view. So it's important where we locate the house, and that's part of what we do as the site analysis. Where do we start? We start with a wish list. What's important to you as the client, as the future owner of this building? You know, how do you come and go? How often do you come and go? Are you morning people? Are you afternoon people? Do you prefer to sleep all day and only get up at night time? All of those things have an impact on the way you start to design a house to suit the person who's going to live in it. You know, we design a number of houses for retiring people on the sides of hills. If the hill slopes away from the road, a common response is that there'll be a garage and a living room with a single bedroom actually sitting on the upper level so that it captures the views. We'll then go down the site for a couple of other bedrooms, a living room, you know, that parents of children who've left home often like to have, just so that when the kids come home, they've got a place to still feel like they're welcome. I'm planning on just reducing to a one bedroom. But we look at how, you know, where is the garage, where are the entry points, where are the exit points, and it's okay to have this lovely sloping site, but it's still got to be practical. So you've still got to consider, you know, how do you get into the garage? You don't want a 25% driveway going off the edge of the cliff to bottom out to try and get in the garage. It's okay getting in. Sometimes it's not so easy getting out. That response also creates the potential for a dangerous situation if you're trying to reverse up out of your driveway, onto the driveway, across the footpath. You know, that's an outcome that nobody really wants to see. You want to put the places you spend most of the time where they capture the best elements of the site that you bought. You want your living room to be able to see the view. You want your dining room to be able to, you know, be in that comfortable part of the house where, you know, it's a nighttime room, but, you know, lovely to look out and see the lights down the valley, but maybe not so necessary to be located on that northern or eastern side of the house. We always treat the master bedroom a little bit specially. You know, it's the pride of place. If there's a second room beyond the living room that wants to get a view, it's the master bedroom. They're the people who paid for the house in the first place. They get pride of place. How does it work? Inevitably, there's going to be stairs. We start then to think about how many stairs do we need? Where do those stairs have to end up? How do we minimise the number of stairs that you, as an occupant, would need to go up and down on a regular basis? So we understand then, you know, if the most of your day is spent, I dare say this, very stereotypical, kitchen, living, laundry, seems to be the place where a lot of people spend a lot of their time. So we don't want to separate those spaces physically by a hell of a lot. We don't want to separate those spaces vertically by a hell of a lot, because that becomes tedious. Arriving home with the bags of groceries, how do you get from the garage to the kitchen to the pantry? How difficult does that become as a task? And if you do that once a week for 10 years, that's a lot of trips up and down the stairs carrying a couple of Coles bags. You know, so we need to contemplate all of those types of things. And, you know, if it's at a holiday house and you do it for a week, yeah, you'd probably put up with a lot more. But when it's your house that you live in, day out, you really need to have an extra focus on making it a simple, easy place to live in. And that means that it's convenient for the people who occupy it. Here, this is really just a mass model of a building that's running down the slope. It's got that ideal direct orientation. This is a site on the edge of the escarpment in Toowoomba. The road is at the top, and on the western side, the slope falls to the east. There's a magnificent view across the Lockyer Valley down below. So what has this building done? It's broken up. It's broken the levels. It's created a lot of interest in terms of the form of the building. Again, not the cheapest response, but certainly very pretty. But it's created a group of spaces that are a collection of like-use rooms. It's not stepping a full step between levels. It's broken up into half-step levels, so that regular interaction between this level and that level is only half a flight of stairs, not a full flight every time we do it. If you've got the space and you've got the ability to do that, that's what we try and do. From there, we've got a general idea of what we want and how we want the rooms collected and grouped. Then we start to put some bones into the floor plan. Again, we never stop thinking about where's our light coming from, where's our ventilation coming from, where are our views coming from. and how do those connectivities actually all come together. Again, this is what I spoke about before. You know, this is a necessary response in the example, but that is a full flight of stairs, somewhere between 16 and 18 stairs to get from the car to the main living space. You know, if you're in your 20s, you probably deal with that. If you're in your 50s, you're probably starting to get tired of that. So again, when we think about designing a house, we've got to think about it in context of the people who are going to occupy it. Some of the benefits we get of split leveling, though, is that we get that greater access to sun, we get a greater access to shade. We get to, as Lisa said, we get for the same floor area, we get to make the building narrower so that we can elongate it to the east and the west. We get access to winter sun by having north-facing glazing, or we get access to summer breezes by having southeast facing windows. So a one-room wide building that faces, you know, runs east-west is actually a very efficient outcome in terms of your climatic response. And views. Again, we've got this magnificent view. If we get the opportunity to get a view from every room, when you put that on the real estate brochure, that's actually worth a lot of money. You don't always get that chance, but if you do, you bought the block of land to make the most of your views. So let's make the most of it in the way we designed for it. Cross ventilation, again, narrower building footprints, more opportunity for windows to be open on both sides of a room or a space. The less distance there is between the windows, the more effective the natural breezes are able to pass through the building from one side to the other. The less you need to rely on air conditioning to keep your environment the way you want it to be. And then we talked previously about, you know, where do you locate particular spaces where you need to transition from inside to outside. I would pick the garage is very important. Your front door is very important. The laundry door is also very important. You see too many houses built on slopes where the laundry is one of the last places that gets considered. And it's okay, just wheel that trolley down 15 steps to get to the backyard. You know, it's not an appropriate response to the site. And the other place, and sometimes on a fairly steeply sloping site, you know, we all like to have the indoor to outdoor connection. We want our living rooms to open out to the backyard. On sites like these, oftentimes that's actually not possible. You've just got to make use of the living room and an outdoor terrace that's elevated, and the yard space becomes somewhat disconnected. That's a trade-off. Less grass to mow if you're landscaping, you don't go down there. We have, I'll say it helps our imagination having access to 3D modelling tools. It really does. If we can play with the sizes and the shapes of the building blocks. And sometimes it is kind of like play some days. It's not really work. But it lets us experiment. It lets us look at how does this mass sit on the site? How does that mass sit next to this? Where does it give us access to the views? Where does it give us the breeze? Where do the parts of the building interact? And it lets us push and shove those things up, down, forwards, backwards. It gives us the opportunity to play with shadows. We can test that building mass depending on the time of the year that it is. Where's the morning sun? Where's the afternoon sun? How is that different in summer to winter? And it changes significantly. As we come south, it changes more significantly than it does the further north you go. So your summer design response is very different to your winter design response. You have to consider both. I won't tell you where that is. One of the places in my local region that we're not proud of. That is what I would define as a very poor response to a sloping site. I can't even guess that fill batter is 8 to 10 metres high. There is no way that fill batter will remain stable to the level that you would expect for the expected lifespan of that house. That's what we try and avoid. Save some money on construction cost. We burn some money on cut to fill. And we'll probably think about underpinning that in about 10 years' time. And that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Sean, who's going to talk about how to do all of that on a 10-metre frontage.
Yes. Thanks, Owen. G'day, I'm Sean. I own a small building design practice on the Gold Coast. So I specialise in small lot development and NDIS as well. So I'm a registered provider for the NDIS with building design. So today I've been asked to come along just to talk about small lot development, and I thought I'd share the micro village project that I worked on the Gold Coast. So I thought I'd talk about the particulars of the development and how it all came together, and yeah, just share the experience and how it all came about. So this particular project at the time was considered the smallest freehold lots in the country. So in, I guess, 10 years' time, you could actually tear that middle building down, the 3-level building, and build something else. So typically they look like, I guess, townhouses. They're actually freehold homes, so actually own them outright. The intended purpose behind them was, traditionally there was an old house on this block, and this development was in Southport on the Gold Coast. So there was a POD scheme attached over that area, which is a priority development area. And that's something that the state government has been involved in, and one of only, I think, maybe 2 or 3 in the southeast, the other being in Fitzgibbons Chase. And they're to encourage really less red tape through the development process and encourage high density projects. So the developer and the builder on this one, I guess it had the reversal effect. So the intended use was like a 100-story building, for example, in Southport. Now, there's just no scale of economy for that type of project at the moment in that type of area. So they've found that developers are going and looking at the land and assessing what can be done on it. And this is quite an initiative approach to probably what will be the future of a lot of developments in inner fringe suburb areas. So suburbs that are close to CBD areas where they're restricted by price points at the moment. For example, we all know real estate at the moment has gone straight through the roof. So this is sort of a response to that, where you can actually own your own home and own it relatively close to CBD areas and be close to infrastructure and things that are happening as well. So it's really interesting sort of stepping back from the development and reading into, I guess, a lot of comments by people that have subjectively commented on the development in the sense that, well, for between 550 or 600 grand, I could get a house. And traditionally you could, but those homes are, say, in areas that are, you know, in excess of 30 to 40 kilometres away from city areas where you're more reliant on your car or motorway infrastructure to get to work, and you just, you know, you're systemically, I guess, in that sort of, yeah, in that spot. So I thought I'd talk about each of the key points. So market demands, population density in fringe areas, which is what I was just talking into, property prices and the impact of COVID on design outcomes. So market demands, this particular project, when marketed, is comparable against apartments. So, you know, apartments are, say, like in between $500,000 to 600 to 700 grand in that area. So this is a unique development in the sense that apartments, you've got body corporate, strata titles, all this sort of ongoing infrastructure key that you have to sort of maintain with apartments. I know because I live in one. Whereas this comparatively, you only own the home outright, so you've only got, you know, your council rates and those sorts of upkeep on the property as well. So again, in 10 years' time, you could put a bulldozer through that and rebuild your own home on that again if you wanted to, knock down, rebuild essentially. There's also better value in this type of property as well, opposed to apartments. So when you're valuing it, there's a plethora of apartments and it can be hard to finance some of them. So because this is an actual home, the bank would value it higher, I guess you'd say. So finance is easier to obtain when purchasing the property. The other key objective is the market demand. So over the 2-year period of this project, we've seen the shift in the project in terms of what the market was wanting. So say, for instance, when compared to apartments, and the apartments being 2-bedroom, etc., the market, we originally started with 2-bedroom homes, and then that shifted to a 3-bedroom product. And just that continual sort of ongoing change throughout that project span. Yep, cool. Sorry, I'm not much of a public speaker, so it's my first time to okay, so yeah, on this home, there's traditionally much similar to the house on the right. It was an old dilapidated property that was the project was re-subdivided and with re-subdivided with 5 lots on it. And the intention behind the developer was obviously 5 micro freehold homes on that site, and obviously all of the challenges that that sort of takes. So the key point about this societal unease about high density living, there are a lot of comments about people, not having the appetite for great big tall buildings within these inner city fringe areas and the societal impact that that has. So this particular project being 3 levels is really a response to that, in the sense that these are micro freehold homes, are accessible to things like trams and immediate infrastructure in that area. And that are sort of mindfully designed and curated to really respond to some of those outside objections when people are sort of critical of the development that's occurring in these areas. So one of the biggest issues throughout this project lifespan has been construction costs. To give an example, to build a 3-level building, which is lot 5 in the middle there, the cost in terms of buildability aspects, so from the builder coming in to actually trying to build that and stage the builds as such that they're building them all at once, opposed to staggering them and having one built at the front and then in 6 months' time, the other being built to the side, etc., blow out a lot of costs. So, for example, lot 5 in the middle, we had to build that out of core-filled blockwork on the ground floor and then timber frame on the upper floors. We couldn't build that as timber frame on the ground floor because we don't get the racking force for the upper levels on top, because they're engineered in such a way that there's nothing around them, because they're considered, again, freehold homes, not engineered in such a way of like townhouses, etc. So that really led to innovative solutions as to how we can minimise sort of like our carbon footprint offset in the other lots. So lot 6 was the last project to remain, which is down the bottom here. So we really considered modular form construction, or being built off-site, opposed to being built on-site, to offset a lot of the construction costs that were inherent throughout that process. So some of the issues that were faced through that construction process, like for example, is a restrictive building site. So having materials on site, scaffolding costs, craneage, all of these sorts of things that are often not really discussed early on in the piece, in the design to build process, but is something that should be considered throughout that an early conceptual project management phase, I guess you would say. And one of the other big things that it was occurring was double handling throughout that process. So going back, reshuffling trades and materials around, all of these things that add inherent costs to the overall project, and in effect sort of eat into the margin with the builder and the developer and the project. So that really led to a modular form construction with lot 6 of being built off-site, and was then later craned in on site and then stacked up through the process. So we really conceptually masked the lot 6 to sort of understand, well, if we built them in pods and had them craned on site, we won't have the issues with scaffolding or trying to get trades in to build block walls and then timber frame and the inherent cost of construction throughout that process. So the pods were then able to be designed and manufactured off-site, then craned in, and in the matter of, I guess, a week, you have something from nothing to something in a really short period of time. So the construction, that build process really shortened throughout that process.
Sean, when you say pod 1, pod 2, pod 3, are they 3 different houses or 3 different houses, or is that one house with 3 pods?
Yeah, so this is one house, and they're 3 pods because they're a 3-level building. So they're getting trucked in one by one and then craned in on site on top of each other. I've got a 3D model of an example of that, and I'll show you just in a tick. Yeah. So this is an example of one. So these lots are only, off the top of my head, I think they were 3.6 by 20 and 30 deep long. And you can see here, this is all just one home essentially. So this is one that was designed originally to be built on site, where we went away and evaluated that, well, look, it's going to be too expensive to build that. Let's look at a modular form construction. But you can sort of see, as both Owen and Lisa had mentioned, that there's so much to consider in terms of the design to build process, from aspect cross-flow ventilation, accessibility, and the buildability aspect, which is what I've mentioned. So a lot of these projects get designed and never actually get built because they become too expensive, or there's a lot of sort of stumbles through the process that just blow our cost, or just a whole range of things. In terms of the design of this one, it had sort of a Spanish flair to it with the arches, a lot of design trends. Obviously, we're still mindful of things that are marketable and what the market's wanting. So, just with the arches and the different cladding types, the bricks, just some of those sex and sizzle items that the market wants on these types of homes as well. In terms of the design as well, you can see through the middle when we have the climatic response, light and vent, and all of these sorts of things. Right through the middle is the staircase, and on the building next door, you can see sort of a skylight up the top there. But this acts as sort of a light well that allows 50-50 light distribution throughout the home. So whilst it's small and only on 3.6 meters wide, it feels a lot bigger and a lot more livable than I guess you might think. So you've got like plenty of light dispersed in each of the levels through the 3 levels. And it just makes it a lot more livable and a lot more usable with the interaction with the space. So this one is, yes, it was. So this is an example of a schematic concept on the same lot for a modular form to be built off-site where they come and crane it in. So through, so let's see, through 3D, which I don't think we can. Essentially, they're just pods stacked on top of each other. And some of the auxiliary items are just sort of bolt-ons, essentially, once everything's sort of craned in and built in. So that just gives a bit of a rundown or an example of how the pods are designed and built off-site, and how that is comparatively to the other lots where they were sort of built on-site. and built frame on site. Just to give a bit of an example. So this, like the wind loads, which is what I mentioned earlier. So we had trouble getting the racking floor, so we had to build core field block work construction on the ground floor on the other ones, and timber frame construction on top, because they're engineered in such a way that they don't take account for everything around it in terms of that build process. If there's any questions, feel free to jump out. And again, this was a sort of final form with lot 6 in terms of that modular form. So this one was scaled back to meet the price point of that particular client that bought that lot. So you can see that some of the items in terms of the facade were sort of pared back compared to the Spanish flare a couple of concepts ago. So again, the modular form stacked on top of each other, and then we've just got joint trims between each of the joists that sort of sit on top of each other. And then that interaction again with lot 5 next door as well.
Excuse me, sure. Is the plot building generally more cost effective than traditional building methods?
Yeah, a whole range of reasons why. So with the adjoining lots next door, because they were staged differently based off market conditions, meaning that they had a buyer for one, and that buyer, was unconditional and ready to move, so they needed the design to be built and get moving on it. But the other ones didn't start construction for maybe 2 or 3 months. So what they found is when you build one on these restricted sites, and then in 2 months later you go to start another site, you're double handling a lot of trades, a lot of costs that actually evaporate a lot of the margin in the project. So the modular form meant that these could be then produced off-site and then trucked in and then craned in on site in a short period of a week. And you offset a lot of those labour costs in terms of scaffolding, a lot of the engineering requirements as well. And it's a lot more efficient and streamlined in that process to get that built a lot easier, if that makes sense.
Are there a lot of builders around that are starting to use this type of method for residential? Is it very specialised in like coast areas?
It is. There is sort of a perception that it can be lower quality as well, but it really depends on the type of project and where it is. For instance, in this environment where you're building such mass density in such condensed space, it makes sense to address modular form construction because you offset a lot of those efficiencies in construction to get the desired outcome. But if you're talking in just, let's say, a mass residential estate, your typical volume estates that you see out in the fringe suburbs, probably not, because there's a lot of co-efficiencies built in traditional volume build construction, meaning that if you're to do volume build construction, it may end up, modular form construction, it may end up more expensive because the proven methodology in those areas are just sort of brick veneer construction and standard construction, if that makes sense. Plus, it's also really an industry eye-opener as to where we may end up living in 10 to 15 years' time. Just as a lot of these inner city areas become a lot more expensive, as we're seeing in the last probably 6 to 12 months, where property prices going through the roof, that these projects will probably become more desirable than opposed to traditional, apartments that you see across the road or townhouses, because number one, you own the home outright, it's yours. But number two, it's efficient, it's affordable to still get in, opposed to living 30 to 40 kilometres outside of these areas, and you're still accessible to tram lines. So down, or infrastructure and transport. So down the road here is the Southport tram line as well. So you can walk down and, obviously get to work, and your societal connection is not societal connection. Your connection back with like cafes and infrastructure and all that sort of things is within that area as well. So yeah, that's it. yeah, I'm not sure how sort of fluent I was in that. I was sort of jumping between things, but
Yeah, Sean, I have a question. What's your height?
so these ones had a plan of development attached to it. This one being in, I think it was, because it was in the PID, I think from memory, I think it was above 30 meters.
30.
Yeah, no, 30 meters because of it was in a. I'm trying to recall. Because of the PID attached to it and the priority development area and allowing that.
They could. Do
Yeah,
that,
we could go higher. So on that one, it capped out at I think 12.5 meters, or in terms of that height of that 3 level one there on the left.
So 12.5.
Yeah.
That's high.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
So when you consider though wanting 3 bedrooms,
Sure. And the depth.
yeah. That 3 level one was particularly interesting in the sense that on the ground floor, we had a bedroom as well as a kitchenette, so you could actually sublet that out to uni students and that sort of thing, and actually shut a portion of that back area of the home away. On the 2 levels above, there was a bedroom at the back, bedroom at the front, on the top level, and a bedroom at the rear. So essentially, that's a 4-bedroom house on 3.6 meters by about 16 meters deep. Yeah. And then 2-bedroom product in behind it, and then another 3-bedroom on the right, and another 3 on the right, and then lot 6 is 2-bedroom as well.
And so all the plumbing's going down the middle, or?
Yep. Yeah. There's plumb stacks all throughout the design. So on things like roads where we can fit that in. Yeah. Cool.
Did you design all 6 houses
So
yourself, or did some of it get sent out to other companies?
No, so originally the stages before it were designed by an architect, and the developer that built on Ladyberg Street, it was myself and an architect. So there were two different schemes that were being developed. So the architect was a carryover from the previous stage, and that they found that the project was too expensive with the involvement with the architect. So it was originally then master planned through myself, where I met Paul Eagles, who was a developer of that lot, and I master planned all of the 6 lots there on that project. Because it was marketed and sold, it was then the buyers that bought the land could choose whether or not they wanted to use an architect or building designer. So I've designed on lot 6 and on lot 5, and one at the back there as well. The additional lots then were designed by an architect because the clients wanted to use that service because it was a carryover from the other lots. So originally I designed on the whole project and designed all of the homes on it. And yeah, hopefully that's
Sean, is that the house that was there before, is it? The one beside, or is that next?
No, that's I think that's
Random photo.
Yeah, random photo.
Okay.
One that was on it was like a dilapidated sort of fringe shack, which all run down, and they've sort of just demolished that property, taken that away and re-subdivided the lot. Yeah.
Another question down the back. Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, this is a question, Sean. When you once you go to 3 stories, do you start considering this?
On this one, no. So actually, this one, the building classification is still a 1A, and because on lot 6, that particular client wanted to sublet the bottom component out, it was sort of shut off on the bottom, and then they could sort of live up on top as well. By the time you start introducing lifts on, let's say, for instance, 3.6 meters by about 16 meters deep, you really become restrictive in terms of trying to then add stairs in it as well as then the light and vent requirements as well. So your lift shaft will take up a lot of that lighting requirement. But that's not to say, look, if the market was then, let's say, I don't know, an elderly couple and they wanted only 2 bedrooms across 3 levels, and by all means we could then look at introducing a lift shaft through it and address that appropriately. It really depends on the type of client, what they were wanting to extract from that design and that site. If that makes sense. Some of the other challenges probably going forward that will be faced with some of these developments is probably the update with the NCC. So the National Construction Code is going to be updated to make accessible housing mandated. So things like level thresholds and ramping, wider doorways and hall spaces and these sorts of things. So these will obviously impact, developments and projects like this going forward as well.
No, just another quick question. Is acoustics going to be coming up as a priority in the new code that you know of? Or in other words, well, did you consider acoustics in this? I'm sure you probably did. Is it a big issue?
Yeah, look, 100%. So it definitely is a consideration. So on the left is obviously firewall all the way up and down. So that has an acoustic value built into it as well as the core fill block work on the ground floor. And then the insulated walls and fire rated walls on the right hand side as well. Yeah.
What cladding systems are being used to get fire rating separation?
So this one's a James Hardie product on that one. So we've got the we've got the James Hardie system on these ones, yeah. And the James Hardie cladding as well. Any more questions?
Sean, I can see why a developer would like to do this, although it looks expensive to do, which obviously you found. Was it a special government or council approved project to use that space as this project? Is that what you were saying was a special classification?
So it has a priority development area scheme attached to it in Southport that allows these types of developments to occur. So there's a lot of less red tape to actually go and build something like this. So things like car parking restrictions and all of these sorts of things are all cumulative of that as well. So the back 2 dwellings don't have a garage attached to it. So that's permissible under that priority development scheme, where car parking is less restrictive and less of an issue.
It looks like a nightmare for me because there's 2 car parks. There's nowhere on the street. I saw, it's just all, there's nowhere to park basically. So it's good for a certain client, but not for many of us in Australia.
Correct. It really depends because this is right near the university and infrastructure as well. So these 2 down the back were, their intention then is that they can use the tram lines, which is only just down the road, and the tram line and the infrastructure around that to service that type of development, if that makes sense.
And did you find there's a lot of demand for it?
Yeah, so they all sold relatively quickly. The issue was probably from a valuation perspective because there was nothing comparable to develop them against, and that some of them were falling over on that aspect. But certainly throughout that area, it's been sort of a catalyst for change. People are really sort of looking at that and thinking, well, okay, look, for $500,000, I can own my own home and own that, outright opposed to an apartment with what are called written strata tiles and sinking funds and all these sorts of things attached to it as well. That will probably be a catalyst for a lot of future development in these areas, opposed to great big, 100-story buildings that their intention was originally for. Another example of this would be Fitzgibbons Chase, just up on the north side in Brisbane there. I've done a few in there, which are sort of Soho. So you can, Soho small home office, where on the ground floor, it's really interesting, actually, if you get the opportunity to have a look through some of the street application in Fitzgibbon. It's probably the only one that I'm aware of in the country where it's sort of like a European model. So they've found like you've got these beautiful like Indian grocers and just all of these sorts of really unique sort of grocers or supermarkets or just small businesses. And then on top, someone lives up on top or owns that as a whole, but you're not infringing on things like like from a planning perspective, because there's still class 1A dwellings, so there's still sort of classified as single residential use home, but you still have that ability where you can sort of, use the space as a flexible space, if that makes sense. But you're right, I don't think these are appropriate for areas, I guess out in outer-lying suburb areas, I guess you could say, probably not appropriate for that reason with car parking and just, people living on top of each other, quote unquote, that sort of thing. But yeah, they're quite a niche, unique type of development or project.
The dollars of that, so look, you talk around $500,000, what was on that price and what's your price?
So all up, the one in the middle there, the 3-level one there was 750, and that was obviously pre-COVID, post-COVID.
Yeah, that's a total price.
Yeah, that's a total
And what's
price.
the square meter you're getting out of that?
So all of these had to be above 70 square meters from a valuation perspective, because the bank wouldn't value it.
Right.
The 3-level one, from memory, I think was about 120, 130 square meters. And they're all really unique. Originally, the one on the right, I was doing a design where, up the top had like a freestanding bath, and you could sort of cantilever and see the views over Southport and all that area as well. Yeah.
Sean, you'd have to hope that at 750, not planning to knock it down in 10 years at 75 grand a year. That's a lot of money for a small home. So.
Correct. That was like just an example, just because it's a freehold lot. Your ability to do a knockdown rebuild, you could do because you own the land. And that's the key of a lot of these areas in a Gold Coast at the moment. They're all just bulldozers going through a lot of them at the moment in that knockdown rebuild area. And yeah, it's just really a societal change into how we're using these spaces and utilising a lot of how we consider projects. I mean, even post-COVID, how we're actually integrating and using a lot of these spaces and how that impacts design and where all of that goes forward as well. Plus construction costs, that's the biggest one. I think it's just bananas at the moment. So, yeah. All right. Is there any more questions or anything? Just feel free to let me know.
Looks like we've started.
Yeah. I've got some questions for you, sorry.
Have you? No, I've got to go now.
Oh, you were talking about, the cut and fill. That is what happens. And unfortunately, a lot of us, for example, us, our block looked completely flat. And when they did the contour survey, so we just went to a project builder because it's cheaper. And when they did the contour survey, there's a 1.7 metre fall. So it's unbelievable that the block looked flat, but it did. So we were already locked into a cut and fill, which is really unfortunate. So it's very frustrating to see that. But how do you know in advance? Like, how do people know if your block looks flat? You get a contour survey early on, and then you decide whether to go custom or project, or you have more information. Is that what you would recommend?
Look, I'm just going to put in a great big plug here. See your designer first.
Yeah.
I think without, I'm not going to disparage anybody and what they offer and what they do. Our pitch to the consumer in general is that if you come and talk to a designer, obviously a BDQ member, first and foremost, but I guess what we're able to do and what we offer is an early assessment of your size, an early assessment of what it is that you want, and whether or not we finish up designing your house through to construction for you, or whether we simply give you, there's a lot of designers who are happy just to do a site analysis and a concept design. Here's the block of land you're thinking about, and we'll make those recommendations to you. Go out and get a soil test, go out and get a survey. We'll check planning scheme stuff for you, and we can just give you, I guess, clean, objective advice to consider this, consider that. If you think about putting this house on that lot, this will be some of the consequences. There'll be some good, there'll be some bad, and I think that's that's our side of the story. It's not the way a lot of the sales of particularly those sorts of subdivisions of lands occur. The sales are you go, you see your home builder, he's got a block of land, he's got a house plan, and you put these two things together. I will say there are some home builders who are very, very open and upfront, and they're prepared to tell you all of the things that you need to know. And there are others who want nothing more than just to sign you up on the contract and then tell you what it's actually going to cost to build. No names.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's why we exist in the world, I suppose, is you know, because you get that opportunity to see it, and we have no real bias anyway. I mean,
I want to make a comment there as well. A lot of it, I think, also comes down to a budget perspective as well. So when you engage like a volume builder, they perhaps, you're really dealing with a sales consultant that may not be particularly aware of how a home's actually constructed on the site, or even what the cut and fill and all of these site works are as well. So when you engage like a building design, we can talk into like maybe splitting or benching the site, or, you know, a design that's reduced. Yeah, or a design that's reduced in areas where we can look to batter out or grade, you know, do bench tiered retaining walls or something to that extent as well. Yeah, I just thought
It's just frustrating because when you go to, if you look for a few custom builds and you look at some project builders, obviously if you're building, you know, you want to have some options, and budget is important. So if you go to a budget build or a project builder, you know, they say it's from 300, but it ends up being 550 anyway. If you go to a custom builder, they'll say 600 at the moment, pretty much. Well, they'll probably say 450, but it's really 650, or more. But it's really hard to know. There just doesn't seem to be much variety. Like, is there any way, or is there anyone that does a project build or an economical build without doing a custom build, but we don't want a slab home? Like, there just doesn't seem to be anywhere to go. So if your block's not exactly a flat slab and you don't want a slab for ventilation and for access later, how do you get that at a budget? You know, it's just, and I don't mean a cheap budget, I just mean a reasonable price, that you're not paying 800 grand. For example, we just ended up going with this budget builder or project builder. It's a good project builder, but I wanted a really simple rectangular house, like you said, at the beach with lots of air, and I just couldn't get that for less than 800, and it's ridiculous for the price for that, you know. So we just ended up compromising and going for a house I don't want, but it's just more economical. So why do we not have this on a bigger scale rather than having to do it individually each time?
I think it needs to be done individually each time, because every site's different, every budget's different, your needs are different. So what you want in a house is not going to be the same as what I want in a house. So I guess that's where, like Owen said, going to a building designer, straight up, you tell them exactly what you want. One of my first questions to clients is, what's your budget? Because there's no point me designing you a $2 million house if your budget's 500,000. Obviously, we're not builders, we're not mind readers, you know, not estimators, but we do have a reasonable idea of costs and do try to stick within the client's budget. So, and we're sort of subjective, we're not tied to any builders generally. So you own the plans that we do, as opposed to going to a project builder where you're stuck with them. So if you come to a designer, you can take that set of plans to 3 or 4 builders, and you've got the opportunity to choose the builder that you get on best with or has the best price.
To answer from my interpretation, from the question, from a builder's perspective, if you're looking at like a custom volume builder, for instance, they're probably carrying 20 to 30 jobs at once, and they're also trying to handle the trade shortage and the trade cost at the moment.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I think they're probably a bit congruent in the sense that, yes, that house should cost, you know, maybe 600 grand, but at the moment it's costing 800 grand. And I think their intention is to get it to that price, but they're really dealing with a weekly increase in all of these trade costs at the moment. So from like a development perspective, I know for a fact that a lot of projects are now being held, and they're going to wait 2 years, opposed to, you know, paying these prices for all the trade increases at the moment. So to answer your question, I don't know that there's a great deal in that middle ground between the two. A lot of builders in the volume builders that I'm aware of are operating at very little margin at the moment. And they're having to carry the cost between each of these jobs. And if they're not, they're in sort of this tangible position where they could end up going into liquidation or something, because these jobs are being held and they're not getting progress payments. So I can sort of see it from a builder's perspective, but a consumer's perspective at the same time. And all I can say is just this sort of mashy environment at the moment as a result of COVID and the trade shortage and the costs on all of the materials at the moment. So my answer would be to do due diligence and engaging, designers like us that could probably carry you through that process to really speak into where a lot of those unknown efficiencies can occur. So things from the site work costs down to where we can just align things rather than being, I wouldn't say too artistic or too flary. It really depends on your budget.
Just curious why the project builders, or there isn't a project builder, or you guys don't get together and say, these are the designs we can offer, this is a city view facing, this is a breeze facing, I don't know, just having some options as a group. So at least you've got something to work with. You might be able to change a wall or whatever, but
we do, we definitely do, but it's just not as linear as that. There's so much outside of that to consider. So for instance, if it's an inner city block and you've got slope on it, I mean, how long is a piece of string in terms of engineering costs and how it's built? So things like piering, wind classification, soil type, all of these things can go from a $0 option to like $100,000 option instantly. So it's just not quite as linear
as a slab house.
With the slab. Let's say for instance it's an inner city block, but you've got, I don't know, a P site. And that's a problematic site that we've got to deal with. And you've got pairing all the way down to the moon, down to like wherever. Who knows? There's a lot of just unknown costs that can't be factored in. So the way to sort of, I think, design around that would be probably designing a smaller home where we can sort of, I guess, factor in those unknown costs. But then, that design may not be as appealing because you might see the Joe Blog builder next door and say, wow, that's a 300 square metre home.
Sometimes, unfortunately, the marketing departments have a habit of setting unrealistic expectations of what it should cost too. That's just, be aware of that. What's advertised as 300 might really be 400, and what you really want is actually worth 500. So again, take that, giving you that independence to go and actually get a variety of options from, you go to 2 or 3 builders if you're looking for something, and you've got to shop to what you want. There's the large budget guys, they produce a product for a price on a formula. We tend to sort of deal mostly with, if I describe them as the large unique builders and the small volume builders, that's sort of the niche where, that's where you want to be looking. But again, it's horses for courses, and whoever you choose needs to be, suited in the nature of the way they build, the nature of the way they deal with you, the price point that you're looking for, the level of quality you're looking for, the level of finish you're looking for. So if you have a clear understanding of what you want and what you expect, you're better able to achieve that if you do that sort of upfront. Puts you in control of the outcome to the extent that it can.
Equally, these builders are trying to cater for everyone as sort of like a blanket on top of everyone as well, in terms of trying to capture everyone's sort of feedbacks, wants and desires. So for example, other clients might be just the bottom of the barrel dollar and we just want it to be this and that, and that's all that we want. Whereas others like yourself are very discerning in the process in terms of your needs and your wants and your desires. So it's very hard to try and capture it all for everyone. But I do hear what you're saying and appreciate what you're saying. And certainly they're the challenges that we face as building designers when we're asked by builders and developers in producing designs, plans and content for the market, to be mindful of those conditions as well.
Well, I was just looking around, there's a lot of us here that wouldn't be building our first home, so that's why it's just hard to find that, if you don't want a slab and your site doesn't suit a slab, where do you go that you're not paying double? That's what we want. We want something that's, that's economical, but we're prepared to pay for it. But it's just how to find that where you're not having to trawl through 100 cuts to find something that suits your block and that you want to build, suits your aspects, suits your wideness.
There are broker services in the construction industry as well that can service that as well, where they can lean into specific builders at certain that are geared towards certain type of construction. The last thing you want to do is obviously engage a builder from the yellow pages that may not have had any experience in the type of construction that you're looking for, and sort of promise you that they can and have no experience in delivering that. They can meet you on the budget aspect. So I've seen horror stories in that area as well. So.
Well, it is difficult. I mean, one of them was individually designed homes, but what we ended up getting, we built ones with them, and they were really good. Like, they were good. It was a slab home, really, on a slab. So it's exactly what you were describing, but we didn't know it was our first time ever that we built. And we just went, well, we didn't understand, but we understand now. You know, they cut a lot of soil out. They didn't take advantage of all the things we should have taken advantage of. If you don't know that, because it says specialises in slabbing blocks, so that's what was interesting to come today.
Yeah.
So, you know, where do you go?
Designer first.
Yeah, really. That's obviously why we're all here, to find out more about it.
Yeah.
Right, about roof, what's better for heating, tin roofs with tiles?
That's probably not a question for me because in Cairns, no one uses tiles.
Right.
So I'm not sure you guys might be able to answer that one better.
Yeah, look, tiles will retain more heat like the concrete block walls do.
Yeah.
But ultimately, there's not a great deal of difference in the insulation values between the two. It's a little bit, but you know, your added insulation is the thing that really makes the difference. And depending on where you are in your climate, you make some choices as to whether you insulate on the underside of the roof or you insulate on the ceiling. If you're in a climate where you're trying to keep the building cool, you're going to favour putting insulation to the underside of the roof. If you're in a climate where you're trying to keep the inside of the house warm, you're going to favour putting your insulation at ceiling level. Two different approaches for two different types of climate.
Typically in Queensland.
Do both? Yeah, and a lot of times you do. A
more-
lot of times there's some on the roof and some on the ceiling.
Yeah, we have very rarely tiled
Yeah,
roofs, which is probably
yeah.
more for cyclonic reasons as well. They act as
We do regulation, so we
projectiles.
end up with a tile roof, so it's fun, like, we change it eventually down the road, or we keep it and then we insulate in a different way. But it's a big cost to change entirely.
yeah.
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 It was interesting seeing what happened out at Ipswich with the hailstorms and down towards Springfield last year in terms of them just ripping roof tiles. I think that was a really sort of good indication as to why colour is used more heavily here in the southeast than I guess in Melbourne and Victoria and these southern areas, which again are more of a climatic response.
Can you just say the benefits again of having that, like the roof blanket and then the chats?
Yeah, okay, so your blanket's your insulation layer, and depending on what you're trying to achieve with your insulation, if you're in a hot climate where you're trying to keep the inside of the house cool, by putting the insulation to the underside of the roof, you're stopping the heat from getting into the building envelope. It's keeping your roof cavity cooler as well, which means that you don't have that hot air sitting against the ceiling as much as you can. So you're really picking which direction you're trying to maintain your temperature from. If it's an inside out response, obviously if you're trying to heat, heat naturally rises to the top of the room. So if your heat's ending up against your ceiling, what you don't want to do is you don't want that heat that you're generating or you're paying to generate passing through the ceiling and then heating up the roof cavity as well, because you're then heating a substantially greater volume of air to achieve the same thing. So in that instance, you drop the insulation as a preference down to the ceiling level. Whereas if it's a cooling place, yes, you're trying to stop it.
Does that sort of cover
Yeah.
everything as far as?
Oh, look, you can put as much insulation in as you can fit.
Yeah.
You know, it really, and to be fair, the cost of insulation is pretty low these days. I mean, 15 years ago, having insulation in a house was probably considered a little bit of a luxury, whereas now it just goes everywhere. And you know, to have your insulation that thick or that thick, the dollar cost difference to do that is pretty minimal.
And you've got other things you can use, like whirly birds in the ceiling and snapping fence. Which are like,
Yeah.
And then is it also that it's also recommended that you have insulation in your walls?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. All right, I've got one more and then we gotta go.
Sort of plan on building a place about that high off the ground. Hopefully.
Yep.
Worth putting in on the floor insulation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Look, you might find it, depending on your climate zone, you might find that it's a requirement that you have your underfloor insulated. But again, if it's open under, you're subject to the breezes and you tend to lose a lot of heat through the floor. Your floors, you know, on balance, your floor, a suspended floor accounts for maybe 10% of your heat loss from a building, but yeah, insulate it.
Just the fine coil stuff.
Whatever you put works. The only thing I'd say is just be mindful of how you seal it for vermin. What you don't want to do is create a lovely little home for the mice to live in. So just pick an appropriate insulation for the purpose. All right, on that note, we better go. Thank you very much.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, this is outside, it's around the returns. This is the. Excuse me, I have a question. Natural ground level, if I got a survey
Yes.
and I want to establish the natural ground level
Yes.
on the survey,
Yes.
can I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I ran it today.